So the 80s are cool again, and it has been for a while, thanks to nostalgia. Some of the most watched original shows right now are callbacks to the previous decades. And for those who were there, you're being reminded of a simpler time. But some of us are just now hearing about certain things that have been around since forever. So it's almost like they're brand new. And when the youth gets a hold of something they think is brand new, they'll obsess over it, tell the whole world about it, and make it fashionable. It's important to try to stay updated and relevant, but sometimes you don't even have to try. You can just wake up one day and be trending. Hi there, so we are now in the midst of the final season of Netflix's best show, Stranger Things. The show takes place in the 1980s, and just like in previous seasons, it's using pop culture and actual events from the 80s to build on the story. There's a lot of Easter eggs and inspiration taken from sci-fi movies and TV shows that were actually airing during this time, like Steven Spielberg's E.T., in season 2 they did Ghostbusters, and the novels of Stephen King, like Firestarter. Also, there's the unforgettable way they used the Never Ending Story theme song in season 3. As well as the whole 80s summer vibe. I mean, the whole concept of Stranger Things basically is the Goonies and the Breakfast Club dealing with unexplainable supernatural events. This season really puts you in the 80s by making references to things like Stephen King's Carrie, with the cringy bullying of Elle and the heavy follow-up storyline to the Cold War Russian connection made in season 3. The Cold War was a big deal back then. Basically, it was America and Russia being real suspicious of each other. Stranger Things does a good job leveling with the Russians and showing that most of us, regardless of location, are mostly unconnected to what our government is doing in the shadows, and we're all just kind of afraid of what might happen next in general. Kind of like now, except it was scarier because we didn't have all this technology to distract us and numb us to the horrors of real life. But I'm getting off topic. On the other end of the spectrum, the show seems to be doing a Candyman, Freddy Krueger thing with the Vecna character. Another huge pop culture thing they're referencing this season is Dungeons & Dragons and how it was demonized in the 80s and 90s. Dungeons & Dragons is an American fantasy role-playing game that originated in the 70s. It's seen as the game that started modern role-play gaming and the RPG industry itself. I kind of think of it as a board game where every game, including the characters, is custom made every time that it's played. Like every session you make is a brand new game with new characters, and all the action is determined by the random roll of a dice or several dice at once. The game comes to life through people improvising through their characters and the strength of the narration by what is called the Dungeon Master, usually the one more experienced D&D player who keeps tabs on everything. It's very much like everyone gets together and writes a fantasy novel from scratch.
It's similar to what a high-stakes poker game might be like. It's a game where friends gather that's taken deadly seriously and is a lot of fun, but it's serious.
I myself am a very visual type of gamer. I need to be able to see the game and what's happening. And D&D pretty much requires you to use your imagination. So it's great for those who like to read and take notes. Many millennials like myself had their first experience with RPGs in video games. Pokemon Red was literally my first experience with an RPG, and some things that stood out from any other game was that you got to choose the name of you and your Pokemon, and you only had one game save. These are role-playing basics that started with games like D&D, in that you can only play one game at a time, and you're free to name your characters, and you choose what they do and who to interact with. You have to build on that one game you started and finish it, or just throw everything out and start over. Well, as you could imagine, D&D was pretty popular in the time before internet and digital video. And before Nintendo and video gaming really even became a thing, tabletop and board games were the video games. Players had to use their imaginations to entertain themselves if they wanted to experience anything more exciting than an 8-bit arcade game. Tabletop and board games were the thing that all the kids were into, and just like with popular video games like Grand Theft Auto, it had controversy and negative publicity. This whole 80s satanic panic scenario is used as a major plot point for season 4 of Stranger Things. A high school D&D club called Hellfire Club is used to tie in the new character Eddie Munson to the main cast. A cheerleader named Chrissy is killed by the homage to the classic villain who inspired Scary Terry. Eddie flees, knowing that no one would even believe him if he told them what happened. And the jock students find out that Eddie was the last one Chrissy saw, and that he was an active player of that allegedly evil D&D game. So they go on a witch hunt. Eddie was indeed the dungeon master of a D&D game that the main cast was getting together after school to play. The name given for the campaign they were playing was called the Cult of Vecna, as some creature named Vecna was the boss they had to defeat in order to win. Eddie and Dustin end up naming the invisible killer that they're dealing with in real life, Vecna. So this whole final season can be seen as an extension of the D&D game that they started playing in the beginning. This might be the coolest way that the series was able to embed real 80s events into the plot, next to the Cold War situation, of course. Now, the power of music as a way to motivate and get through mental obstacles has always been something relatable in human nature. In the 80s, music became a lot more mobile through portable cassette players. Music on the go is another thing that was really popular with the youth. To capture how reliant a teenager was to their music and how the character Max was dealing with the loss of her stepbrother Billy and just being a teenage girl in high school, the perfect 80s song had to be picked out. Max's favorite song, to be important for the plot and her character development, was by the music artist Kate Bush in one of her lesser known tracks, Running Up That Hill. The song is 37 years old, and because of its role in Stranger Things, it got a full-on revival, charting around the world and reaching #1 on iTunes. Kate Bush herself has responded on how this, quote, new leash on life for her song has been all really exciting. Stranger Things has always featured lesser known songs and hits from the 80s, but Running Up That Hill is the first song that had this degree of overnight success. Clearly, it's because of the way it ties into Max and the overall story. These songs usually end up as just background music, or as a 3-second reference. The song was first released in 1985 from Bush's Hounds of Love album, which was her 5th album. As an artist out of the UK, Kate Bush's style is that of art rock or experimental pop, taking inspiration from glam rock and classical music. The kind of surreal style of music that would get a lot of play today by cultured internet youth who listen to artists like Bjork, Grimes, or Solange Knowles. Kate Bush made a lot of music between the late 70s and early 2000s before going on hiatus. During the 2010s, that experimental melodic sound has gotten really popular, and being how Kate Bush was doing this in the 80s, you could say that her sound was ahead of its time. So with this specific piece of music and this tabletop role-playing game, it seems that Netflix's best original program has made the 80s cool again, once again. Even with the huge boost from Stranger Things, Dungeons & Dragons has already started gaining more popularity in recent years. What was once known to be a game for the nerdiest of the nerds, played behind closed doors, is now being tried out by more people and broadcasted all over the world. Why would you think this is? I'd say it's because since 2008, after Spider-Man 3, The Dark Knight, and Iron Man had achieved massive success at the box office, nerd culture has been encompassing more and more of the general population. People who were never into video games have started playing video games. People who used to laugh at Harry Potter and Star Wars are now fans of the series and watch the movies and shows with their loved ones. Same with anime. And the biggest blockbusters over the last decade have been Marvel and DC films. Some of the most watched shows on TV have been sci-fi fantasy stuff with dragons and aliens in it. So nerd culture has done a complete 180 with society and is now the definition of coolness and pop culture itself. And it's been like this for years now. We're really in the thick of its normalization, actually. It was only a matter of time before one of the nerdiest things imaginable, Dungeons & Dragons, would start gaining new players through some mainstream popularity. The rise in video game technology in the late 90s hit the tabletop community pretty hard, and thus D&D as a property ended up being purchased from the original publishing company, who was close to bankruptcy back in 1997. The new and current publishers, Wizards of the Coast, is a subsidiary of Hasbro, who acquired Wizards in 1999. They've done a decent job of keeping D&D relevant in this new competitive era of gaming tech. They put out several new revisions of the game throughout the 2000s, including the design for the D20 system, which used a 20-sided dice. The new versions allowed more flexibility with players and their characters. They changed up the rules, made the game more fast-paced, and created new campaign guides and adventure modules, artwork, and merchandise. Wizards of the Coast really tried to improve the game and encourage new players. As D&D reached modern-day gaming, it actually reached peak popularity. Wizards reported that in 2017, it had the most number of players in its 40-plus year history. With the help of Twitch, millions of people were watching others play D&D, getting themselves involved in the tabletop RPG even if they've never played. Working with this video streaming strategy, Wizards organized more live events, some featuring Dungeon Master celebrities, and D&D inspired web shows over Twitch and YouTube. In 2020, the gathered demographics of the game were extremely positive for an old RPG game, showing that 40% were female and 40% of the age demographic were 24 years old and younger. A big chunk of Gen Z kids are into D&D now. The pandemic of 2020 certainly played a role in this, as people had more time to sit around and learn a new game, or to just watch one being played somewhere else out of curiosity. D&D also had the mainstream nerd culture to thank, along with shows like The Big Bang Theory and, of course, Stranger Things. Nostalgia has proven to be trendy across all forms of media. And like with all trends across time that lose popularity, you'll see that in 20 to 30 years, it'll be popular again. Maybe it's a secret longing for a not so complicated time, an escape from what we're used to. Or maybe it's the fact that no form of entertainment out here is brand new. It is simply being put on a rotation of interest. What's not so cool now can be cool later. Because of this, and the whole rotation of interest thing, that line from Back to the Future,
I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet, but you kids are gonna love it.
will never not be relevant. Dungeons and Dragons used to be looked down on as some satanic ritual that only creeps and losers got involved with. And Kate Bush, as a chart-topping artist in the UK during the 80s, had almost been forgotten. But thanks to second chances and the rotation of trends, they both live on in relevancy. Second chances are really something. It really makes you want to live on long enough to see who and what else will get their second chance next. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe to Retro Sick for more interesting things surrounding nostalgia. And with that, I will
See ya!